Shalom Aleichem, my dear brothers and sisters. In this video, I would like to explain to you how God proved monotheism to the ancient world. And he did this using the 10 plagues, through which he plagued Egypt. And the 10 plagues are really broken up into 3 sets. There's the first set, the first 3 plagues. Then the second set has the second 3 plagues. Then the third set has the third 3 plagues. And then the 10th plague is actually something else, and it was for an entirely different purpose. So we're going to work with the first 9 plagues, and then we'll talk about the 10th plague. Now, throughout the Jewish liturgy and throughout the Jewish religion, we have a concept called that 3 establishes something, meaning number 3 makes something solid. So that's why, for example, when we wake up in the morning, we wash our hands 3 times. Before we eat bread, we wash our hands 3 times. And, after using the bathroom. And this is a known custom. For example, if a person, let's say, did something 3 times in a row, it becomes like a custom for that person, and he has to continue doing it, unless there's other circumstances. But this is the main idea, that 3 establishes something. In fact, we see this in the physical world as well. You'd have a table, for example. You need at least 3 legs for the table to, to be solid, standing solid. You have a rope. You need at least 3 little ropes to make a braid, to make the rope strong. So anyways, 3 established. That's why each set has 3 plagues in them. So the first major philosophical problem, or major illness, I would say, in religion in the ancient world, was that people worshipped idols. Now, when I say idols, what do I mean? I mean that they worshipped certain physical object or phenomena because they believed this object could have some divine powers. So God had to first prove to the world that there is somebody above the idols that they're worshipping, somebody who's in control of these physical objects or phenomena. So the main idol, or the main god of Egypt at that time, was the river Nile. Because once a year it would overflow, and it would irrigate their gardens, and they believed that, our life sustenance depends on this river, and therefore let's worship it. So therefore God had to prove that, no, this river, there's somebody above this river. Somebody controls this river. And that's why the first set of 3 was directed directly at the river Nile. What happened? The first plague was that the river turned into blood. The second plague was that the frogs came out of this river. And the third plague was that it actually says that the earth turned into lice. Now, why exactly the earth? It says that the Egyptian magicians were able to reproduce the first 2 plagues using magic. Although on a smaller scale, but they were still able to do something similar. But when it came to the third plague, they could not. Now, what's the reason? And we have from the oral Torah, the explanation is that I don't personally understand this myself, but for some reason, the magicians cannot affect anything that's smaller than a barley. So since lice are really tiny, they cannot do anything about it, and manipulate this. And that's why they couldn't repeat the third plague. Now, I don't understand this myself personally. If somebody has an idea why exactly that's the case, I'd love to hear. So the first illness was cured. That people saw that somebody is above their idol that they're worshipping. Somebody was able to punish that river, or turn that river into blood, or make the frogs come out of the river. So the first cure has been completed. And that is why, when giving a reason for the first 3 plagues, the Torah says, with this you will know that I am the Lord. That's in Exodus 7:17. Now the second cure. In the ancient world, there were some religions or philosophers that philosophized that yes, there is a creator to the world. However, or creator or creators, maybe, they could have been polytheists. However, whoever created the world, he created the world in such a manner that the world runs on its own now. Meaning, God has created some kind of a machine called the universe, and now this machine is working and has the laws of physics, and it just operates on its own. Meaning God does not involve himself in the physical world. That's what some people believed. In fact, you probably heard recently Stephen Hawking, the scientist, passed away, and I saw in one of his interviews where he said exactly that. He said, even if God created the world, God created such a world that he himself cannot change or cannot manipulate. That's what Stephen Hawking said. And this is, he maybe thinks this is a new idea, but this idea existed in the ancient world. Ancient philosophers thought the same. So God had to prove that no, God is in control of this physical world as well. He does, control things inside the world. He's not just the God that's somewhere there, who created the universe, and now the universe runs on its own. So that's why the second set of plagues, which is starting with the fourth plague, was that the wild beasts came to Egypt and they started attacking the Egyptians. However, they did not attack the Jews. And with this, God showed them, see, I'm in control of the animals who they attack. I choose. They attack the Egyptians, but they did not attack the Jews. So this was the fourth plague. The fifth plague was that the domestic animals of the Egyptians suddenly started dying. But the Jewish animals, the Jewish domestic animals, did not die. In fact, the Torah says that Pharaoh sent a delegation to check whether the animals of the Jews have died or not. And they came back and told him not one animal has died. But among the Egyptians, all the animals that were outside in the field started dying. So with this, God proved that I'm in control of your livelihood, of the animals, of your livestock. So this was the fifth plague. The sixth plague was that suddenly the Egyptians had boils on their skin. Very painful boils. But the Jews did not have this. Only the Egyptians. And again, God proved to the Egyptians that, you see, even your health is in my hands. I'm not just the God that has created the universe and now it runs on its own and therefore there's no guidance. No, I'm the God that controls everything in this universe. It's something that's called in Hebrew hashgacha pratit. So the second illness was cured as well. God proved that he controls things in this world. He's not just the God that has created and that, just left the scene. And that is why, when talking about this set of plagues, the Torah says, in order that you know that I'm the Lord in the midst of the earth. That's in Exodus 8:18. And now for the third illness. In ancient world, as you have heard, people not only believed that there's physical gods, objects, and all that. No. Another problem was that they believed, even if it's not physical, they believed in many gods. Although maybe not physical. This was called polytheism, right? People believed in many gods. In fact, there was an ancient religion, I believe they were called dualists, which brought down the number of gods down to 2. Meaning, they believed that there has to be at least 2 gods. The gods of the opposites. So, for example, they reasoned that we see in this physical world opposites. And there has to be a power or a God who's in charge of that opposite, and then somebody else in charge of the other opposite. For example, there's the water and fire, the 2 opposites. So there has to be God of water, God of fire. Then there's the east and the west. So there has to be a God of east, west. Then there's the sky and the earth. There has to be God of sky, God of earth. The gods of the opposites. So God, with this third set, had to prove to the ancient world that He's only one. What happened? So the seventh plague, it started raining down fire with hail. So hail is water and fire is fire. So God is showing, I'm in charge of both fire and water. There's no two that control these things. Then what happened next? It says the locusts came and devoured all of Egypt, the plantations. And it says in the Torah that the east wind brought the locusts and the west wind took them away. So God showed to them that I'm in charge of both east and west. This is all within my domain. And then the third plague in that set was the plague of the darkness, where for 3 days it was dark. Now, according to the oral Torah, how did that happen? So the way it happened was that a thick cloud, some kind of a cloud, descended upon the earth, and it was such a thick, tangible cloud that it was so dark that people couldn't even move. And with this, God proved that I'm in charge of both sky and the ground. I combine the two. This is all in my domain. And therefore, the third illness was cured with this set. God proved to the whole world that He's one God. There's not two, there's not three, there's not four, there's only one God. And He's in control of everything. So this was the 3 illnesses that God has cured the ancient philosophy, I would say, or proved to the ancient world what is God, the concept of God. And now for the 10th plague. What was the purpose of this plague? This was a separate plague. And remember, the first 9 was only to prove a point. In fact, God tells Moses ahead of time that Pharaoh is not going to release the Jews. I'm going to harden his heart. Why? Because God wanted to prove the point to the world. So therefore Pharaoh had to withstand these plagues and not give up, continue to be stubborn. But now, since the point was proven, now this was time to actually send a plague which is going to cause Pharaoh to finally release the Jews. And this plague was the slayings of the firstborn of all the Egyptians. And it says whether they were king or king's firstborn or servants or slaves, anybody, all the first, even animals, all the firstborns of the Egyptians were killed in one night on midnight. And now why exactly this plague? Why not something else? God could have done many things, right? So I think the verse in Exodus chapter 4, verse 22 and 23 gives a very convincing explanation. It says in verse 22, and I quote, "And you shall say to Pharaoh, so said the Lord, my firstborn son is Israel. So I say to you, send out my son so that he will worship me. But if you refuse to send out, behold, I am going to slay your firstborn son." So this is called measure for measure. Just like the Egyptians did, God did back to them. Thank you for watching.